Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I hope everyone's doing well. Uh, we took a little bit of a break, but we're back, alhamdulillah. A long break. Uh, but you know what? Even if our minds weren't engaged, our hearts were. So we'll pick up where we were, and maybe we'll find that actually there was some growth that was happening in the interim in that period. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت الحكيم العليم اللهم انشر علينا رحمتك وانزل علينا حكمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. So welcome back for those that are listening for the first time. This is a series that we do on Wednesdays in which we deal with the knowledge of the heart, right? And this is one of the most important. It's one of the three branches. We know that the Prophet ﷺ in Hadith Jibreel talked about Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. Islam, these are the outward actions of the limbs and the tongue. Then there is, of course, the Iman, which is faith, which is a matter of belief, which is articulated by the tongue, but it's ultimately carried out by the limbs. And then there's Ihsan, excellence in worship. And this is once a person has achieved uh, both some level of perfection in their Islam and in Iman, in their faith, now they can work in achieving that excellence in which they feel and sense Allah's watching over them in their worship. The word that we've used is that this is the knowledge of suluk, right? And I prefer this because suluk denotes behavior and actions and character. The most common word that people use is tazkiyah among all Muslims, which is about purification of the heart, which is also a very good way of describing what we're talking about. So, this is one of the most important branches of the sacred knowledge. I think in the modern era, it has received the least amount of attention because we live in a scientific age, an information age, in which empirical knowledge is given greater importance. Things that can be quantified, things that can be measured, are given more importance than things that seem qualitative, things that cannot readily be measured or can't be noticed. So personal development only recently has been given more attention. So now it's trending, but it wasn't trending for a long time. Um, and that level of mindfulness is very, very important. You see in the tagline when we send out the emails, we said that this is about prophetic mindfulness, right? And what does it mean to be mindful as a Muslim, right? Um, it also touches upon intentions. And that's a good segue for the new hikmah that we're covering today, which is actually one of my favorite. It's one of the shortest, one of the easiest, one of the clearest, because some of the hikam have been very esoteric, very detailed, very hard to grasp. This is not like that. This is a perfect hikmah, perfect aphorism for us to re-engage the text with. From Ibn Ata'illah, وَنَفَعْنَا بِعُلُومِهِ, maybe benefit from his knowledge. He says on page 24 in the 26th hikmah, من علامات النجح في النهايات الرجوع إلى الله في البدايات. من علامات النجح في النهايات الرجوع إلى الله في البدايات. A sign of success at the end is turning to Him at the beginning. A sign of success at the end is turning to Him at the beginning. So it's a very simple text. The meaning, I think, is readily understood, but it has deep implications. And it's, of course, one of the most famous hikam. I've even mentioned it in the khutbah. This is one of the one that I have memorized that I mention frequently. And before we go into the details, let's talk about the path. Because he's talking about the beginning and he's talking about the end. So we have to ask the beginning of what? What is the beginning that he's referring to? So what he is talking about implicitly and in the previous hikam is the spiritual path. The importance of treading the spiritual path. Because if you are not on a path, then you don't have a beginning, you don't have an ending, you are stagnant. You're not in a state of flux, you're not in movement, you're not coming to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what this implies when we say that this is the journey of ma'rifah, the journey of coming to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having that special ability, being from the elite people that Allah has chosen to know Him, to come to know Him, what that implies is that Allah is knowable. This is very important. This is the starting premise. Because if Allah doesn't want us to know Him, then it's not important for us to attain that science. Then what are we doing here? Then there's nothing to talk about. So Allah is knowable. And it also shows that human beings are behind the curve. Because everything else in nature is already seeing Allah, has that knowledge and glorifies Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِيحَهُم. So we are the ones that cannot perceive their glorification. We are the ones that have veils that prevent us from seeing nature. And when you remove that veil, when you remove that, then when you look into al-kawn, when you look into the cosmos, when you look into reality, all you see are manifestations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We spoke about that 3 or 4 months ago, right? So, for example, you might see this when you see a tree, it's easy to see the tree is alive. So the tree glorifies Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But even the paper in it, even the things whose form was composed by human beings, that are made by human beings, in reality, that also glorifies Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if we say that all of nature knows Allah, glorifies Him, magnifies Him, then what is it that's left? Who doesn't? Who in existence does not glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's only us. It's only the human being that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted the ability to make that choice, to not walk on that path, to not tread on the spiritual path, to not try to attain that position in which they are connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's a conscious choice. And only the human being can make that conscious choice not to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you see a lion, right, that, it might seem that the lion is eating the hyena and so it's violating some kind of law, but it's not. It's following its law, which is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in that system of nature. And so it is glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not an act of defiance. But when we disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we cause harm, it is an act of defiance against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that means that the nafs, the ego of the human being, is the only thing in creation that can take someone outside of submission from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when that happens, where do we go? The human being has the full gamut, right? So things in nature have a narrow range. So the human being can be a'la al-'illiyin, can be the highest of the high. And of course, that's an easy question. Who is it that is the highest of the high? That is al-insan al-kamil. Sorry about that. Turn off the volume. Al-insan al-kamil. Who is the embodiment of perfection and bashar in the human being? That is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is a'la al-'illiyin. So we have an example of what that looks like in the flesh, right? And then we have ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. So we have the lowest of the low. So what takes the person from the highest to the high and the lowest to the low? It's only the ego. That is a conscious choice and a decision. And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about a path, when the author talks about a path, it is the spiritual path, right? As Ibn Rajab says, he says that the journey of this dunya, he said, it is not tuqta' bisayr al-abdan. It is not a journey that is covered by the traversing of the bodies, of moving from one physical space to another. Because we're thinking we're all on a journey in this world. Kun fi dunya ka'annaka gharib. Live in this world as if you are a stranger. أو عابر سبيل, or you're just a traveler, right? So we're basically on a stop, on a way to something else. But that journey is a spiritual journey. As Ibn Rajab mentioned, he says, but rather this journey is traversed by the heart. So there are actions of the heart. We're going to go back to that in just a moment. And the journey has an ending. and the journey itself is transformative. That means that the beginning is going to look different from the ending. The ending, you should be in a better state and a condition from the beginning. Now, if we want to take it to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, a hadith that I think all of us know or may have heard before is the hadith Qudsi, that many of us know, in which the Prophet ﷺ said that there is nothing that my servant does to draw closer to me than maftarattu alay, than that which I have obligated him to do or her to do. And then وَمَا يَزَالُ عَبْدِي يَتَقَرَّبُ إِلَيَّ بِالنَّوَافِلِ. And then my servant continues to do a little bit extra, maybe waking up for Fajr a few minutes extra to do rak'atain. Do 2 rak'ahs of tahajjud. Or you see that there's an opportunity to fast on the 6 days of Shawwal. That way I can complete the reward of a year, and says, okay, I'm going to avail myself of that. Or I will do, after I finish my salah, instead of jumping up, I'm going to do tasbih, subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, right? So they do a little bit extra from the nafila, from the voluntary action, and they continue to get closer to Allah. And then this is the part that we care about. Hatta uhibba. Hatta uhibba. It's one of the most beautiful statements. Allah said that my servant, this is, the words are from Prophet ﷺ, but the meaning is from Allah. It's Hadith Qudsi, right? He said, my servant continues to get closer and closer and closer, and to ascend darajat, to go up in levels, to change their hal from one hal to another hal, until I love him. So what does it tell us? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling that the journey ends with what? His love. The journey, I mean, where do you get to how do you know whether you succeeded or not? If you have attained Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love, then there's nothing more that you need to attain. Then that's it. That is everything. So you end in the fi hadratillah. You end in the divine presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the greatest of goals is to be beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So everything else is an effect, right? It's not the goal itself, which we've spoken about before. Allah says, وَأَنَّ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ الْمُنْتَهَى. وَأَنَّ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ الْمُنْتَهَى. That the final end, the greatest goal, the greatest aspiration is to reach your Lord. So the way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, this is kind of a side note, is that it is guided by people. Because if you have a path, you need signposts, right? Now we're going to continue the analogy. It has a starting point, it has an ending point. Then you need directions. So before you start it, you need to open up a map, right? Or if you have if you have an automatic GPS system, what is the equivalent in the spiritual path of having a GPS? Somebody who's going to give you directions in real time. Now that means you need a murabbi. You need murabbun. You need people of tahqiq, people who have already treaded the spiritual path. It's like, oh, watch out for that thing. There's a left turn. You got to be careful. Watch out when this happens. And they will be there to give you pointers. They will also extend a hand. If you get a flat tire, they're going to come and patch you up and help you, push you along the way. So having a spiritual mentor, this is part of the tradition of this ummah, which has been lost. Because we all think we can do it on our own, right? So we don't, you can call it a sheikh, you can call it whatever you want, but having somebody who will, you can even have a friend who is ahead of you on that path, who will offer you their experience, because it's experiential knowledge. And this is the way the knowledge is transmitted. Just how, when we study these mutun, these texts, how do we study it? So for example, somebody studies Fath al-Bari, right? Which is the masterpiece by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, the commentary on al-Bukhari, right? So if I studied it from my teacher, who studied it from his teacher, who studied it from his teacher, who studied it from his teacher, and it continues. What is that called? The link, and the next link, and the next link. This is the chain. This is the sanad. Our knowledge is based on isnad, based on asanid. So the spiritual path is similar in that this is an inherited tradition. So it goes from one teacher to another teacher to another teacher. And this is why they say, why do we have all these different tariqas and different groups and different approaches? These are all fine. But don't think that these tariqas are the real truth. The real truth is al-haqiqah. The real truth is the truth. These are the ways. These are the ways because somebody's like, well, I mean, how many different ways can you get from here to Frederick? Different ways. But if somebody says, I have a different destination, then we're not ending up in the same place. Now we have a problem. Now you're directing people away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now there's an issue. But if you're directing to the same destination, but saying, well, this is another way, which comports with the Quran and the Sunnah, so there will be different ways, different based on experience. So the path, that's the first part. The second part is the signs of success. For the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the success is in reaching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when do you see the sign of that? You see it in the very beginning. And there are smaller signs, right? So going back to the hikmah, it says, من علامات النجح في النهايات الرجوع إلى الله في البدايات. A sign of success at the end is turning to Him at the beginning. So the main topic here is, what does it mean? الرجوع إلى الله. Turning to Allah. That's the main topic. But before we get there, let's talk about the smaller signs. One, that Allah blesses you to know that there's a spiritual path. How many Muslims are deprived of tazkiyah, deprived of purifying their heart because they're in a denial? They said, no. We don't need to do zikr. We can just pray and fast and go on hajj, and that will be enough for us. And I mean, nobody will deny the Islam of that person who does that. But by being in denial, they're depriving themselves of experiencing the divine presence because they've denied that it even exists. And so they're not able to aspire for it. So number one is you have to know about this spiritual path. Number two is Allah has to instill in you a desire to tread that path. And in many cases, that path can be treacherous because it will require some personal sacrifice. It will require you to realign your priorities. You may have to forego some relationships that are harmful for you in this temporal world because there's a benefit for you later. That's number two, that Allah has placed that in you. Third, Allah facilitates the knowledge of the people of Allah who can guide you. We just talked about that. And the last one, which is also very important, these signs are mentioned by Sidi Ahmad Zarruq. And he says, learning fiqh in religion, knowing the hudud, knowing the limits. And this is the problem, because you have some people who think that they're spiritual. But in that is a contradiction, because some of the people of the spiritual path are missing this element, because they don't know what are the awamir of Allah. What has Allah commanded me to do? What are the nawahi? What are the things that He has forbidden me to do? How is it that I can perfect my worship? Because the person of tazkiyah, the person who's trying to purify his heart, definitely is going to be mindful of their salah. They will not neglect an action that Allah has made mandatory and forgo that in favor of something which they think will take them along the spiritual path, because they recognize that they will be in a state of Allah's displeasure by disobeying His command. So a true person of tazkiyah would never dare to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then in the same breath approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that way. Can you imagine saying, I love Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, but then if you meet him, then you disobey something that he told you to do? You wouldn't. So another thing that we can notice is that it mentions that min alamat al-nujh. So he says alamat, that there are signs. That means that there are multiple signs and this is only one. And what it shows is that there are multiple fruits. There are nihayat. So he talks about al-bidayah, one beginning, and he talks about many endings. And one of the reasons for that is because there are many things that start to open. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens up the doors, He creates many opportunities and there are many fruits. Okay, so this takes us to the main point, inshallah, which is ar-ruju' ila Allah. That is the sign that we need, is the turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ar-ruju' can also mean the returning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which implies that Allah is someone whom we already know and who we can find. Because we're returning, you can only return if you've been there before, right? So that alludes to a kind of fitri knowledge, something that is primordial. And the opposite of that, where are we moving? Again, the movement is from beginning to ending. That denotes movement. Then we say the secret of success is in what? Ar-ruju' ilallah, is in turning to Allah. That also denotes what? Movement. Every single thing in the spiritual path is about you being in a state of movement towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, regardless of the speed, but that you are oriented. First, you have to face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the spiritual sense, and you have to be moving towards Him. So where are you moving? Away from ma'asiyah ila ta'ah. Going away from disobedience to obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Away from the world of al-his, the sensory knowledge, the sensory world. We think this is real because things have width and height and dimension, and we think that's really real. And then when we talk about the spiritual science, it seems something imaginary. It doesn't seem as real. No. The haqa'iq pertaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these realities are more real than the sensory, heat and cold. Because what is that? These are just functions of our cognitive ability. So if somebody says, well, I'm cold, well, that's how you're feeling. That's your perception of the actual reality. That's not the actual reality. So moving from the sensory towards reality, that is what it is. And this state of movement, remember how we talked about the a'mal of the jawarih, the actions of the body? There are the actions of the heart. And the heart has actions. And these heart actions, that is what makes the difference in the spiritual path. That means that when you do things, you do it by Allah, you do it through Allah, you do it by turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a big part of that is repentance. And turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can mean something different for each person. Because the person who is in a state of disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, turning to Allah will mean to make tawbah. The person who is already in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ar-ruju' ilallah will mean something different. And as one of the teachers said, he said that for some, turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a moment of the heart being touched by Allah's mercy. That means that for some of the awliya, those who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their constant dhikr being interrupted even for a moment, and then to restart their dhikr, that is turning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because there's no one who is always 100% on. Every single person, even the one who is very close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, can ascend in degrees, can be forgetful for a moment. And so by even in that moment, your heart being touched and receiving the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is ar-ruju' ilallah. That is returning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that takes us to the third and the last topic, which is a matter of trust. Right? In this spiritual path, this path of suluk, this path of tazkiyah, you cannot rely on yourself, on your own efforts. You definitely cannot rely on your own a'mal, on your good deeds. We talked about these in the preceding weeks. Because then what ends up happening is you start thinking that I am deserving of attaining this position, that I'm getting it on account of my efforts, that because of my efforts I've reached this accolade. Or you start to assume that because you've reached a certain position that will continue to be the case, as opposed to understanding that this is in reality the continuation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rahmah. Sidi Ahmad Zarruq, he gives three meanings for this. He said the first is tafweed. Tafweed is assigning your affairs back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَأُفَوِّضُ أَمْرِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. وَأُفَوِّضُ, every Muslim should know this phrase. وَأُفَوِّضُ أَمْرِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. Very important ayah which should be on our tongues all the time. Tafweed is different from tawakkul. Tafweed is when you assign your affairs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It denotes your letting go of affairs, of your matters. This is number one. Number two is your qawam bi awamirillah. You're upholding Allah's commandments. And three is placing trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, of course, there's an aspect of taslim for all Muslims. It's called Islam, Muslim. So part of the whole religion is submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but tafweed is different. Tafweed is when you delegate, when you give that authority back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding affairs that you think that you have agency in, that it's your choice to make. But you're sending that matter back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not only will that protect you from regret in the end, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to dispose of your affairs. وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلِ, in a way that is far superior than the way that you would yourself. So Ibn Ata'illah in the Tanweer book, he wrote that whatever Allah enters you into, He will take it upon Himself to help you in. I'll say it again. Whenever Allah is the one that is entering you into a situation, He will make sure, He will take it upon Himself to help you in taking care of that situation. As for the things that you enter into yourself, He will leave you to your own devices. As the Prophet ﷺ said, فَلَا تَكِلْنَا إِلَىٰ أَنفُسِنَا طَرْفَةَ عَيْنٍ. Don't leave us, Ya Allah, to our own devices. He said it in the singular, I made it plural. Even for the blink of an eye, even for just a moment. So the question that I'll leave you with before we get ready for the Maghrib prayer is, how do we know whether we brought a situation upon ourselves or whether that is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And one way that we can answer this is by asking our own sincerity, asking our own honesty. So some people, they said, بعض العارفين, they said, من ظن أنه يصل إلى الله بغير الله قطع به. So if you think that you achieved it other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you'll be cut off from that thing. وَمَنْ اسْتَعَانَ عَلَى عِبَادَةِ اللَّهِ بِنَفْسِهِ وُكِّلَ إِلَى نَفْسِهِ. And as for the one that seeks assistance on the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on his own, that I can do it all on my own, I'm a big kid, right? No more diapers, I'm all potty trained, I don't need your help anymore. This is how we are. وَالنَّفْسُ كَالطِّفْلِ لَكِنْ مَا أَتَمَرْتُ بِهِ, right? So if you think that you can do your ibadah on your own, وُكِّلَ إِنَا, then Allah will say, okay, it's all up to you. You handle it on your own. So Allah tells us that وَقُلْ رَبِّ أَدْخِلْنِي مُدْخَلَ صِدْقٍ. Say that, allow me to enter it with an entrance of sidq, of honesty. وَأَخْرِجْنِي, and allow me to exit. And the meaning is general. It has a lot of depth, layers of meaning. And allow me to exit مُخْرَجَ صِدْق, right? And there's makhraj, different qira'at, right? Where's Anas? We're missing him, right? So he can tell, I don't know which qira'at there are, but I don't know if you know. I don't know, but I know that in the qira'at there's two different readings. But we say in Hafs, we say mukhraja sidq, right? The exiting of sidq. So that means that facing an outcome, you might get something that you did not envision, that you did not intend, that you didn't even want. That's not the outcome that you desired. But because you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in acceptance, even for the thing that you did not prefer, by that ruju' ilallah, by coming to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-iqbal ala Allah, receiving that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen for you, then you will have a nujuh fi nihayat. Then you have the success in the endings, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the barakah and the blessings and the well-being that you, by turning to Him in all of these moments, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant you success in the end. It's time for Salat al-Maghrib. For those who are at home, please don't pray with us. That salah is batil, batil, batil. It has no meaning. Please don't do that. And we'll pray Salat al-Maghrib, pray your own Maghrib, and then continue after, and we'll do the dhikr. Any questions, and we'll do dhikr, inshallah. Mm-hmm. 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 Uh-huh. Yeah. وإليه. MashaAllah. We'll translate it after the break, inshallah. Yeah, that way everybody can benefit, inshallah. Yes, we'll do dhikr and question and answer after the salah, inshallah. Okay.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله هيا على الصلاة هيا على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
استووا سد الخلل. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله. والتين والزيتون وطور سينين وهذا البلد الأمين لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم ثم رددناه أسفل سافلين إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات فلهم أجر غير ممنون فما يكذبك بعد بالدين أليس الله بأحكم الحاكمين. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فسبحان الله حين تمسون وحين تصبحون، وله الحمد في السماوات والأرض وعشيئا وحين تظهرون. سبحان الله 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 والحمد لله والحمد لله الحمد 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 لله والله أكبر الله 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 أكبر لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير. Prior to the month of Ramadan, there were many requests to have the adhkar posted and circulated. So what we did is during the month of Ramadan, we posted it on the website, which means if you probably you know the dhikr by now, but in case if you don't, you can go to the website iccpmd.org/zikr with a Z, Z-I-K-R. I know everybody spells it differently. So iccpmd.org/zikr, Z-I-K-R, zikr, and then you can see most of the adhkar that we mentioned, and over time we're going to change it as we start depending on the topic. So for example, today we talked about tawfeed, we talked about tawakkul, so we might do some adhkar that are pertaining to that. But we always start with istighfar, we always end in salawat. You'll see I always do it that way. That's the formula. Alhamdulillah. أستغفر الله ربي من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله ربي 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 من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله تبت إلى الله ونهيت قلبي عما سوى الله. أستغفر الله تبت إلى الله ونهيت قلبي عما سوى الله. أستغفر الله تبت إلى الله ونهيت قلبي عما سوى الله. أستغفر الله تبت إلى الله ونهيت قلبي عما سوى الله. أستغفر الله تبت إلى الله ونهيت قلبي عما سوى الله. أستغفر الله تبت إلى الله ونهيت قلبي عما سوى الله. أستغفر الله تبت إلى الله ونهيت قلبي عما سوى الله. أستغفر الله تبت إلى الله ونهيت قلبي عما سوى الله. أستغفر الله تبت إلى الله ونهيت قلبي عما سوى الله. فاعلم أنه لا إله إلا الله واستغفر لذنبك وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات والله يعلم متقلبكم ومثواكم. حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل. 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 وأفوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد. 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 حسبي ربي جل الله ما في قلبي غير الله نور محمد صلى الله لا إله إلا الله حسبي ربي جل الله ما في قلبي غير الله نور محمد صلى الله لا إله إلا الله حسبي ربي جل الله ما في قلبي غير الله نور محمد صلى الله لا إله إلا الله حسبي ربي جل الله ما في قلبي غير الله نور محمد صلى الله لا إله إلا الله حسبي ربي جل الله ما في قلبي غير الله نور محمد صلى الله لا إله إلا الله حسبي ربي جل الله ما في قلبي غير الله نور محمد صلى الله لا إله إلا الله حسبي ربي جل الله ما في قلبي غير الله نور محمد صلى الله لا إله إلا الله حسبي ربي جل الله ما في قلبي غير الله نور محمد صلى الله لا إله إلا 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 الله محمد رسول الله. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of our efforts, bring us closer to His love and the love of those who love Him, and every action which brings us closer to His love. We have a few minutes, inshallah. We can take some questions. And then I think Sister Nigat had mentioned about the ayah. Why don't we go back to that? Just remind me the ayah. وَأُفَوِّضُ أَمْرِي إِلَى اللَّهِ, right? No, this is مَا تَوْفِيقِي. Yes. Yes. Unib. Yes. So this is wama tawfiqi, and tawfiq, that's a big, that needs its own class. But my tawfiq, which means waffaqa, means for things to be in agreement. So my ability to continue or to be successful, my tawfiq, which is agreement of your will and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will is only through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Upon Him I depend, and to Him is the one that I return to. So this inaba, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that He loves the one who man anaba ilay, the one that returns back to Him. Yeah. And this is the dua of Prophet Shu'aib, so it's a great, and of course we know the difficulties and hardship that he went through. So it's a good example and a beautiful dua that we can also, dhikr, there's a point in which your dhikr and your dua become intertwined and they become one. Kultu. Mhm. Mhm. That's right. Mm. Yes. Right. Right. Only through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right. That's right. And this is and also to connect it to what you said, that I like what you just said. You said that we cannot do any action except with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if you adopt that way of thinking, then you start to see even your actions as fitting within Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions. And then you don't view them as separate. In the sense that you can only exist within the boundaries that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed to happen. And so even if you cause, in one level you cause an action, an outcome to happen, that outcome was only able to be caused through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. So it's very beautifully said, mashallah. Right. Because all of us, I mean, we all know, like, depend on Allah, tawakkul ala Allah, but now we want to see it in more complex ways, because we think, many of us, when we think depending on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we think that our agency ends and Allah's tawakkul begins. And this is not how it works, that these mesh together, and that your actions and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree intertwine. But when you are satisfied and you are accepting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts more blessings in the things that you choose and in the things that you do, right? As opposed to the person who is preferring their own choices and preference over that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen for us. Yes, that's right. I just gave the English. Yeah. That's right. And as usual, I made it plural. Yes, Sister Maya? Yeah, alhamdulillah. It's a very tough, I struggle with it too, right? But I'll give you a little bit of guidance. Um, that and let me go back to what I was also mentioning, because it's not about these two things being separate, because in some cases it can be both. But going back to what Ibn Ata'illah mentioned, he says when Allah is the one that is entering you into something, he takes it upon himself to help you in that. And when you enter into something on your own, so you kind of go solo, right, he will leave you to your own devices. So the question that I had posed is, how do you know what you brought upon yourself or what Allah has brought you? Right? And what you really aspire to is the things that you bring yourself are also the things that Allah brings you. But what's the difference between the things that you bring on yourself and the things that Allah enters you into? And that is the tawfiq, that is the alignment between what you want and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. So until you are, and this is even in the dua of istikhara, that whatever it is that you choose, then make me satisfied. Wardini bih, this is in the end of the dua, that make me satisfied with it, and be content with waqini bih. There's different versions, right? And give me that feeling of contentment. But that is in the past tense. And this is talking about in the future sense. So before it even happens, you are already satisfied and content with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting you in. So it's not that you suspend it, and this is why a lot of people struggle with some of the hikam of Ibn Ata'illah, because it seems very passive. It seems like you are suspending your own agency, in which you're not making choices and decisions yourself, and you're just waiting for things to happen to you. But that's not the case. what's happening is that you are happy with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen for you. So you end up only desiring what Allah has decreed. That's the key right there. That that you give the moment its right. You are now sahib al-waqt, and you are focused you've harnessed all your energy in how can I respond to this moment in the way that is the most pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because all that I want to happen to me is that which Allah has decreed, because I love Allah and I'm satisfied with His decree to the extent that I am pleased with whatever He has chosen for me. Right? So it's not that you lose your agency, but it requires you to have a degree of flexibility or openness in whatever it is that's going to happen, that I'm pleased with it, even when it's not what you prefer. And I talked about this a few weeks ago, that this doesn't require you not to have preferences. So for example, you might be applying for a job and you might really want it, and so don't feel guilty, that like you have a preference or you want something. Or you might be talking to someone and you really want it to go through and you want to get married to that person, and for whatever reason, feeling things are not reciprocated, doesn't work out, whatever, right? But you don't need to deny yourself that you have a preference. But then you also, at the same moment, as you're going through that moment, you're in that moment, you're also open to the myriad different ways in which things can transpire, because that's what Allah has decreed for you. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Mm. Yeah. Mm. 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 Yeah. Mhm. Oh yeah. Yeah. That happens. I get messages every Friday where people say, "We were just talking about this last night as a family, and then you talked about it." I get it every week. That people are like, "That was exactly the message that I needed to hear." And you'll be surprised. You'll do a khutbah and like avoid zina, and then somebody will message you later and like, "Wallahi, I was thinking about it." So it's subhanAllah. But this is not something. This is also something from Allah subhanahu wa taala. Yes, we don't know, right? Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, and to add to what you mentioned, I think that the most valuable thing is that sakina in the heart, that having, and there's always good this spiritual path is the only way to peace. Because if you try to find any, I mean, there are other models of spirituality which are beneficial. I'm not denying that they're beneficial. There's wisdom in other teachings, but you will never get true peace. Why? Because it's only in giving the nafs its place and allowing the soul to breathe, and in being satisfied with whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes to happen, that you're truly going to be at peace. Otherwise you're always in turmoil, because the life always is going to go in a different direction from the way that you plan, and sometimes it's actually a lot better, but it still causes a person, it's like you're in a roller coaster. So even though it's exciting, it's fun, but in the moment, I think most of the people don't look like they're having fun. They feel like they're going to throw up afterwards, like, oh, that was awesome, that was great. So life is kind of like that. Like at the end we're like, oh, that was a great ride, I enjoyed the journey, but while they're on the journey they're not enjoying the journey. So it's only the believers who are truly in a state of qana'ah, that are content. Why? Because they're not always comparing. Like, I thought that this was going to work out, and then there's a disappointment. And there are always expectations. And then people, I thought he was like this, I thought she was like this. But people suck. People are never like you think. Right? People are always going to disappoint you. We have disagreements with siblings, we have disagreements with family members. And like, I thought that they had my back. Yeah, but that's human beings. That doesn't mean the person is pure evil or pure good. We're all a mix of everything, right? We are all flawed. But when you have that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you don't have this crisis like, oh my God, I didn't know that a Muslim could do that. Because your iman and your faith and connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not premised on other people and what they do. It's something a lot deeper. So that's the relationship. Mhm. That's true, definitely. Are there any others? Yeah, Chavez? Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. 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 Right, right. Arefin, yeah. Mhm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. You could say righteousness in this context. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but to be fair, I agree 100% with everything you said. But to be fair, even those, I think that all Muslims recognize that Salah is about khushu'. They use different words. And this is when we have to get outside of form and talk about substance. Is there any Muslim that doesn't deny that الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ? We all believe in that. We all, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. So they said that the one who has purified their soul, all Muslims believe in that. It doesn't matter their ideology, their group, we all believe in that, right? وَأَقِمِ الصَّلَاةَ لِذِكْرِ is the prayer about remembrance of Allah. They agree with that. What about doing the adhkar? They wouldn't do it in a group form, jama'i. They wouldn't do it in a jahri form. They wouldn't do it out loud. But they would agree that dhikr is part of the religion. So I think that as Muslims, we should celebrate what we have in agreement. And the disagreement is that they don't believe it is a separate science. They believe that it is subordinate to the Sharia, right? In the sense that the spirituality comes with worship, and it's not a separate thing. But this is not the formula that the Prophet ﷺ gave us, right? So there's nothing wrong in how they're practicing, except that it's missing. It's missing elements that the Prophet ﷺ told us, that there is ihsan in worship, that there is an ta'budallah. There is a type of worship in which it's as though you can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That فَإِذَا, and the other hadith Qudsi that we mentioned, that man aada li waliyan faqad aadhantuhu bil harb, that the awliya, the people who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that when they kuntu sam'uhu alladhi yasma'u bih, that I am the hearing that he hears, and the seeing that he sees with, and the hand that he strikes with, and the feet that he walks with. So what does it mean? That means to have ma'iyya with Allah, to be with Allah, right? Innani ma'akuma asma'u wa ara. So I think we should emphasize the points of agreement, and understand that if you want to study tazkiyah as a separate science, if you want to study suluk as a separate science, I think this is the most effective way to do it. But if you don't do that, at the minimal, then you should study it as part of the ibadat, as part of the worship, right? And what has happened is we've made everything so sterile. It's been so sterilized and surgical that it's like, okay, you have to pay this and do this and pray this many rak'at, and there's no feeling behind it. There's no khushur, there's no spirituality. That's a part of it because it seems too touchy feely. And that is inauthentic. And I began this by giving the quote of Imam Malik that whoever studies Sharia and fiqh but does not purify themselves, faqad tazandaq. That person will become a sinner. Why? What is the problem with just praying? Then you might be praying for other people. You might be praying to show off. You might just be praying out of obligation. You might be dragging your feet. So if you don't have that genuine connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it won't be sustainable because the heart has to lead first and then the body has to follow. So, any others before we conclude? So we'll take this as the last one, Ilyas. Yeah. Uh-huh. I've been saying for a long time we need to do an istikhara workshop. You guys, please remind me. Let's do it. Let's do a salah workshop and an istikhara workshop. Um, so istikhara, what people don't realize is the act of doing istikhara is the most important part, not the response to the istikhara. We're focused on the response. We're not focused on the turning to Allah and praying the istikhara. That action itself is what gives all the benefits. Because when a person turns to Allah seeking Allah's direction, then Allah blesses them in whatever it is that happens, regardless of the outcome. But we are so efficiency maximizers. We're like, which outcome is the right one? And we think everything is binary choices. This is the good one, this is the bad one, right? But that's not how life works. There's infinite gray area, right? And so, and even when you do istikhara, it's not going to remove the gray area. But what will happen is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will either give you an ishara, an indication, right? So you might get a ru'ya, you might get a vision, or something might happen, an event might happen, an occurrence might happen, or you might see a sign. But that is the rare case. Most people don't get that. Other people, and I personally have experienced the second category, which is that obstacles will disappear. Suddenly you had this huge problem, suddenly it will be resolved. Or you had two different choices, and suddenly one becomes much more attractive, and it becomes a lot better than the other one. It becomes manifest that, oh, this is not a good option. And then the third possibility, which is very common, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives this inshirah, sadr, that you just become at peace and you're like, and this is especially the case in relationships where you have an opening in which you're not sure, is this the right person, right? This is especially in this category. And suddenly you feel really good about it. Like, that I have this confidence, or it could be about anything. It could be about job, it could be about whatever business opportunity, but suddenly you feel really good about it and you're very confident about it. And that confidence, and this is a side point, that confidence can make the success true, by the way. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think, if we hypnotize, and I think they've done this, by the way, if you hypnotize people with failing marriages and tell them that their marriage is great, their marriage becomes great. Because if you think you're awesome, it's like if you hypnotize people and tell them like, "Oh, you're a great basketball player." Their basketball game, they're not going to be in the NBA. Like they're not going to be fighting playing with the Warriors or the Lakers, right? But their three-pointer is suddenly going to get a lot better because in their mind, like, I'm NBA material, right? So there's something about faking it to make it, right? So if people really think like, I did istikhara, like, and I saw a sign. I mean, there are a lot of people who like get a dream, and because of their istikhara, they make it work. So there's also a self-fulfilling prophecy in that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages his servants to seek from him and to have that confidence that this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from me. So these are the three categories. But of course, there's more detail, and each person will experience it a different way. And some people get discouraged by doing istikhara more than once, but you shouldn't. Think of it this way: that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala misses me so much that He wants me to keep coming back to Him. Right? So He is prolonging the response because my connection to Him is growing deeper. So we should always approach dua and hardship and difficulty and istikhara in that light. That it's like a rope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pulling us with. So anything that brings you closer to Allah is good, and anything that takes you away from Him is bad. And if you use that mariyar, if you use that definition, then the whole world is going to look different based on that. So inshallah, let's conclude with that. Subhanakallah bihamdik nashhadu an la ilaha anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. اللهم صل أفضل الصلاة على أسعد مخلوقاتك سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم عدد معلوماتك ومداد كلماتك كلما ذكرك الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون. A quick note, as you know, we have the Halaqa with Dr. Tariq on Zoom only on Friday, same time, Zoom only on Friday. And then Sunday morning at 5:15, we are continuing tafsir. The topic is going to be about the stories of the prophets. We're going to start with Adam. And it's tafsir. So we're covering the prophets in the Quran. The stories that are mentioned, only what's mentioned in the Quran, pretty much. And we're going to start with Adam, continue with Nuh, Idris, and so on and so forth. Next week, there is no Wednesday halaqa. The reason for that is because we have a special guest speaker and an iftar on Thursday with Dr. Ali Hussein. He is a very deep thinker, a very good speaker. So I highly recommend people to come in person so you can enjoy the dinner with us. If you can't, it will be on Zoom and on YouTube as well, inshallah. So I hope everyone can join. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.